All right, ceramics, we're going to get started on our first lesson, which is how to make a coil pot. Just to get started, we'll kind of go over the basics of what you need to get started. You have a bucket with your supplies in it. My bucket has a little bit of water in the bottom, and that'll just help us do a few things today, this morning, middle of the night. You need all the supplies that were in your bucket. So you should have like 1 or 2 popsicle sticks. You should have a fork, a paper clip, a paintbrush, some form of ribbon tool. So it could either be like the big ribbon tool or the small ribbon tool or like kind of a combination ribbon, a wooden rib, and a sponge. You should be pretty familiar with these terms from your vocab. The other thing you're going to need is your clay that you have at home and a plastic bag for your project. You have to bag it up every day. And then something to keep your project on. I've just got like the back of a notebook here. So just like a little bit of a stiff piece of cardboard. You could use like a cereal box or like a, Cheez-Its box piece of cardboard. Something that helps you transfer it to wherever you're going to store it. I mean, a piece of paper works okay. A paper plate, a real plate, anything you can kind of just move it around where you're going to be working on your project. Also something that's or that is porous, or adding something that's porous onto it. So if I use like a glass plate to put it on, I should put a paper towel or like a piece of paper underneath it. I don't want it to stick to that surface, because if we push clay into a surface that's doesn't have any porousness to it, it will actually stick to it really hard. So if I push this down into this table that has like a laminate top, it's not going to want to come up without ripping. But if I push it onto my cardboard, it's going to come off really easy because that's a porous surface. And having it on something that's actually movable instead of doing it directly on the table is going to help you, and I'll show you how that is going to work for you as well. Another handy tool is like a butter knife or a piece of fishing line, something to cut your clay off the slab that you have. If not, I'm just going to grab mine off of my hands. So let's roll our sleeves up and get started. So for our coil project, you have a sketch that you're working from to kind of give you an idea of what you're going to do, which should also give you an idea of what size frame you're going to work in. I'm going to work with about a 3-inch base, so 3 inches from one end to the other, not like circumference, but diameter. Oh, wait. Not good at math terms. And then I'm going to go 6 to 7 inches tall. I'm going to mix a bunch of different coil styles here, and I'm going to show you how to work in multiple different shapes. Not just like a cylinder, but maybe like a curvy, maybe a flare, maybe like one of these guys. So the first thing we have to do is make our base. So to make our base, we're going to start with a piece of clay, a little bit bigger than you started with your just kind of practice play with clay project. This is maybe a little bit more than half a pound of clay, bigger than a ping pong ball or a golf ball, but not too much bigger, like a racket ball. So I'm just going to form this into a ball shape. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly pinch and rotate this clay between my hands. So I'm going to take it, and I'm just going to squeeze it and turn it and squeeze it and turn it. And what that's going to do, and I'm kind of like moving my hands around all over the place. I'm not just like, if you just keep on the edge, your middle is going to stay kind of fat. So I'm going to kind of pinch and rotate. And you can go clockwise, you can go counterclockwise. Probably depends on if you're left or right-handed. I want this to end up being about as thick as my finger, though. I don't want to go much skinnier than that because I want a nice strong base to work with. But I still have like some weird finger marks in here. So I'm just going to take it to my non-porous or my porous surface. So either like a paper towel or a paper plate or a piece of cardboard. And I'm just really gently going to push down on it with my palm. Maybe kind of smooth it around a little bit too. Get those like finger indents out. And now I don't see any finger marks on there. Now again, you want to be like right about the thickness of your finger, maybe a little bit skinnier, but definitely not too much bigger than that. But like, if we look at this, it's not a perfect circle. Some of you may not want to work from circular bases. You might do something intentionally uneven, like kind of giving like a wave on the edge, or you might work from an oval or try a square, see what works for you. I'm going to go for a circle. Finding something around your house to make a perfect circle is super ideal. So I was going to go for the outside diameter of this. but it doesn't quite fit, so I'm going to pinch it out a little bit farther. Usually in class, what I would have you do is make a template for the bottom so you knew exactly what you were going to create. We're winging it a little bit. All right, so now I can lay that over it. I'll be able to cut it out. I'm going to lay it down on my surface, make sure it's nice and even. I'm going to lay this guy down on top. Now I'm going to take my paper clip and I'm going to open it up a little bit. I'm going to hold this in place. And I'm going to use this as my template. So if you've got something around the house, like tape rolls work really well. Cups, you have to be careful not to get your clay stuck to the cup if you use a cup. Looky there. So now I've got something that more resembles a nice even circle, and my base is ready to go. I'm just going to move that ahead a little bit. Now I'm ready to start making some coils. This is the hardest part, is actually physically making the coils. So I'm going to grab a chunk of my clay that I'm ready to use, and then I'm going to close up my bag while I'm using it. We want this clay to stay as fresh as possible while you're working. So we want to keep that bagged up, grab clay as we need it. Your hands absorb a lot of moisture from the clay, so it dries out really easy. So we've got some water here. The less you touch it, the better, but you got to touch it to use it. So what I'm going to do is take my chunk of clay, and I'm going to rotate it in my hand, and I'm going to squeeze it down to a size that's manageable for making coils. I don't want to start from that big chunk that I pulled out of the bag. That's going to be really hard to work with. So I actually want to squeeze it down to what's basically the size of like maybe a little bit thicker than a hot dog, like between a hot dog and a brat. Now I'm ready to start trying to roll this out on my tabletop. Make sure you have enough space to work. You cannot just roll through your fingertips. If you do, it's just going to flip and flop and flip and flop, not get like a 360 rotation. And if that happens, you get a flat coil. So I want to make sure I'm rolling through my entire fingertips. So from like finger knuckly part here to all the way to your fingertips. And I'm going to start in the center and I'm going to work my hands out. Sometimes I even kind of like spread my hands out like this, but make sure you're really rolling the expanse. Now you can tell like my coil's not rolling out super quickly. The faster you roll them, likely the flatter they will be. Also, some things to think about are not pushing too hard. I'm actually like really barely touching the clay. We don't want to squish the clay, we want to stretch the clay. So if you squish it, you're going to get flat coils and they're never going to get longer. So really it's like guiding your fingers over and gently working out towards the outside. If I notice that I'm getting thicker or thinner in one area, so like here I'm a little bit thicker, my right hand is a little bit better at rolling coils, I'm just going to roll in that one area for a little bit. I'm going to ignore that part that's a little bit skinnier. And again, remember, try to make sure you're rolling through that expanse of your whole hand. If you start to get an area that happens to be like a little bit flat, just go through and squeeze it round again. And continue to roll. These coils don't have to be super long. What we're doing, oh, that's getting real wonky right there. It takes some practice to roll coils, man. Like it may look easy and it's like way harder than you think it is. So just keep that in mind. If like the first time you roll a coil, you're like, oh, this coil sucks. It just takes a little practice. If my coil ends up getting like really visibly dry and cracky, I can take my sponge, put it in my water, squeeze out almost all the moisture, and just rub some wetness back into my clay. I don't want it to be like sopping wet because it's like really hard to work with if it is, but it'll bring back a little bit of that plasticity, that freshness, and that moisture to it. So now I'm ready to apply my first layer onto my little guy here. Now we're not using slip because you don't have any and it's messy a little bit and it's a little bit harder to maintain and keep at home. It's that slippy wet mixture. We're just going to use water, but that means it's really important that you score really well, compress and meld. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take my fork and I'm going to score this and I'm going to score my coil. So when I'm scoring my base, I don't want to just go in one direction. I want to go in multiple directions. And don't just surface score. You want to really dig into that. You want to see a little bit of clay on your fork. And if you don't, you're not scoring deep enough. So go in a bunch of different directions. And what this does is when we do this, we add moisture and then we score the other one. When they suction together, it creates like this Velcro-y glue effect, and they'll stick together really well. So I'm going to take my coil and kind of lay it out. I'm going to break this off a little bit early. So when I have my coil on here, it's kind of hard to show on the computer. I'm going to lay this on top. And I don't want to coil up like this. When you coil up like this, you get a gap, and then you get an uneven rim, and you build up unevenly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay them on top of each other like this. I'm going to take my needle tool slash, what is this thing called, paperclip, and I'm going to cut through both layers. I'm not going to cut through my base, but I'm going to cut through both of those coils. Then I take this guy out, I take this guy off, and now it fits perfectly. Beautiful. And now I know where to score on it. So I'm going to take this guy, and I'm going to score on here. Just score, 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 score. Score! I'm going to take my paintbrush, or I can use my sponge. I'm going to like kind of squeeze a little bit of water on there. I'm going to squeeze a little bit of water on here. Sponge works better than the paintbrush. I'm going to take it, line it up on that outside edge again. Make sure everything's lined up pretty good. And I'm going to push this layer down. If you don't see the water squirt out of like the edges, you're probably not compressing it on there enough. The top of your coil is going to get flat. Especially for this first one, we want it to connect super well. So I want to be able to like, this coil is not going anywhere, okay? I have seen projects in the past where the bottom just falls off as it dries or after it gets fired because this first coil wasn't connected well enough. So now once I have that on there, I'm going to pull some of that extra moisture out of there because it's hard sometimes to blend or meld. I take my popsicle stick, which is just like my wooden knife, and on the inside, I'm going to take about a quarter to like a third of this coil, and I'm going to blend it down. Don't worry, it looks ugly at first. Kind of hard to do when it's in your hand. Let's see if I can get a good image of that. Coil, coil, blend, blend. I'm going to do that all the way around. I'm pretty much just pushing down on this first one. So I've got that all coiled and melded down on the outside. Then I'm going to take and I'm going to make sure I'm supporting the outside, and I'm going to smooth it out with my wooden knife around and down. I'm going to rotate, smooth it out a little bit, and we'll come back and smooth it out even more. Give you some tips for that. Now we're going to do the same thing on the outside. We really want these to be blended together. Because my coil sits a little bit, if you can, let's see where my camera is. My coil's a little bit wider. I'm going to take and blend again, like a quarter of this thing down. And I'm going to use my wooden knife. If you use your finger, you only blend the surface and you're not actually uniting them. If you're going to use your finger, you got to use your fingernail because it acts as that hard surface that will really actually move the clay around. When you're blending coils like this, you really need to be uniting the clay. Sometimes I'll go down, and if I move too much, I'll blend back up as well. So sometimes it's kind of like a down-up motion. If you get like a big chunk at the bottom, you can kind of go back and forth. So we're doing this without people around. Blend, blend, blend. Blend, blend, meld. Then I'm going to take my wooden knife and I'm going to kind of go around the outside edge, clean up some of that excess stuff. Kind of straighten my wall out a little bit again. I'm started. I've got something. So now what you want to do is, if you get your finger just like a little bit wet, you don't want it too wet. Your finger again smooth. Like your hands are like a great tool for clay, not just the actual tools. So I'm just going to take and use my fingers to smooth out the inside. Get some of those bumps and ridges out. And I make everything. I'm going to do that on the inside and the outside. And right now it's okay to hold in your hand. Like later on, when it gets a little bit bigger, you're going to want to not do that because it flexes the clay too much. I could even take my sponge. Smooth it out this way. When you're using your sponge to smooth, you don't want it to be super wet. It'll make kind of a mess for you. I can also use my paintbrush, and I can get inside those corners or any little gapping and use that to smooth as well. So now my inside is really nice and smooth, my outside is nice and smooth, and I'm pretty much ready to add my next layer on. It's going to be a similar process. I'm going to make sure my foil is nice and round. Sometimes I suggest making that base coil a little bit thicker too, because you're really blending the inside and the outside. Your next coils can almost be a little bit skinnier because you're only going to blend the inside. So again, I'm going to do the trick where I lay it on top of itself. Where's the camera? I'm going to get my tool out. I'm going to lay on top, cut through just those 2 layers, line them up. I got a little bit of a little more clay out so I can show you more stuff. Now, I can slip and score and blend multiple layers at one time. I don't have to do, after that first one, each individual layer. I lost my face here. I don't have to do each individual layer. I can, my camera. There we go. Nope, too high. Can't see the play. I can't, oh my gosh. Well, my head's not going to be in it. All right. You can blend more than one layer at a time. You don't have to do them each individually. So I can do this one, roll out another coil, get that ready, and so on and so forth. You never want to do more than like two or three at a time, though. The clay I hadn't used yet, I'm just going to ball that back up and add it to my next set of coils. So again, don't try to coil from something like this. Not going to work out for you. Make sure you are squeezing your coil into like a relatively even kind of hot dog size. Make sure you give yourself enough space. Remember, start from the inside, work your way out. Use your entire fingers, your entire hand. Make sure you're not just using your fingertips. Less is more. Don't push too hard. If you feel some areas getting flat, remember, just go back in and squeeze those out a little bit. It might take you a little bit longer to get your coils rolled out, just because I've been doing it for a little bit of time. So now, here's the thing. If you're trying to get wider, you have to place your coils a little bit different. If you're trying to get skinnier, you have to place your coils a little bit different. So say I'm trying to get a little bit wider. This next coil that I measure out, I'm actually going to measure it larger than the last. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it on the outside of that coil. So you can see that inside coil. And then I would do the same thing for the next one. So pretend these are full coils. And I would do the same thing for the next one. And then your shape is going to start to get wider and wider. It would be the same thing if you're trying to get skinnier, but the opposite. So I would go on the inside. I would go slightly on the inside. I would go slightly on the inside. So now you're changing the shape inward. So placement is really important. Another thing that's really important is, again, make sure you slip and score between each layer. Make sure you're blending them really well or melding them with your tool. And make sure you're doing it as you're going, because if it gets skinnier, it's hard to get your hand inside of there. I have to support my clay when I meld. If I don't, I'm going to get a shape that I don't want. So if I decide that I want to go skinnier, and I just start pushing my clay pieces together, what's going to happen is my clay is going to stretch as I push on it. So I'm going to be thinning the walls and it's going to stretch and it's going to get wonky. So as you're building up, it's really, really important that even say I'm going to try and make like a straight walled piece, that I support the outside really well when I blend the inside. So when I'm blending, I'm using my tool, I'm going to hold really stiff with that outside. And you don't only have to blend down. Eventually that gets a little bit on the tricky side. So I can blend down and up. Remember, you can go back and forth, blend down and up. And because I supported that, my wall stayed really nice and straight. If I hadn't done that, again, for one, it breaks. Well, you don't hold well all the way around. But it will just start to stretch your clay out. And instead of starting with a cylinder like you might want, you end up with this really wide bowl. Support is the biggest thing on the inside and the outside when you're melding pieces together. Otherwise, your clay will stretch and it'll end up to be something you don't want it to be. All right, let's say, let's throw another coil on here real quickly. Just to add another layer. I'm going to score. Remember, score, score, score. Left and right, back and forth, all the ways. I'm going to do this one just directly on top. I'm going to cut it the way we're supposed to, just between those two layers. That riffraff out of there. Add my water, which is my slip. If you wanted to make slip, you could mix up a little bit of clay and a little bit of water. Or you can just go with the water. Remember now, even I'm going to compress that down a little bit. Maybe not as hard as that first layer was. Use my tool. Blend these together. Make sure you're really supporting so you're not stretching that clay out. Even when you're smoothing the inside out, important just to support. All right, so now say I want to add an interesting design to this, one of those different kinds of coils. There's so many different coil designs that you can make. They all require a little bit of different coils. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a pretty small piece of clay here. And I'm going to squeeze it down to, for sure, hot dog size, because I'm going to make this one a little bit skinny. Every once in a while, you can just you can literally let the table do some of your work. It'll get rid of your fingerprints that are on it. Make sure your table's not full. My table's full of paper mache from making a volcano. It's getting in my clay a little bit. So usually, like, finger size is good. Because I'm making a different style, I'm going to go skinnier. So I'm going to bend my clay. And because I'm going to bend my clay, I'm actually going to add a little moisture to it too. Because I don't want to have made this coil, and then as soon as I start bending it, it cracks. So I'm not pushing hard when I'm doing this. If I am, I can tear it or rip it or stretch it too much. So it's just about adding some water back into this. So I'm going to make a spiral. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my edge at a little bit of an angle. I'm going to take that angle, I'm going to support on the back side, and I'm going to squeeze it so I've got like a little hook almost. And I'm going to use the tabletop to roll it into itself. The water also helps kind of slip it to itself because we're not scoring these. And then I'm going to take my paper clip to cut it. Now I've got a nice spiral. Now this spiral might be hard to put on by itself because it's got to hold itself up. So it's nice to have a couple of them made before you apply it. It's also kind of hard to meld the backside when it's on. So a good trick is to take and hold it in your palm, like the side that you want to show on the outside, so whichever side is nicer. And then I'm going to take my little wooden knife here, and I'm going to blend this all together. So now I've got my nice guy ready. So I'll do another one. This will also help you make uniform sizes because now I've got this already cut at an angle. So I'm going to turn it in on itself. And I'm kind of supporting on the back side. And when you do that, you stop it from doing any cracking as well. So now I can hold this guy up to this one and decide, well, there we go. That's the same size. And I can take this one in my hand. I can blend this down. And I could attach these two, or I can make as many as I need for this row. Or if I'm not doing a whole row and I'm doing something else, I can attach them. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to score. I'm going to score with my needle tool right now instead of my fork. Score this guy. I'm going to score where they're going to connect as well. Just going to use my finger to add water. I can press that down, hold my base. So now I've got two coils on my pot here. There's an opening here. I don't know if you can see that little gapping in between. So a nice little trick to help meld this down and to fill that gap. Just take some of your leftover coil, make just like a skinny little slab guy here. Doesn't have to be too thick. Because I'm going to blend this in really well, I don't have to slip and score it. I'm going to support this really strong. I'm going to push back behind where that opening is. I'm going to push it into my clay. I'm going to take my wooden knife and I'm going to blend that in to both of them. And then I'm going to blend that down into my wall. So now I still have the same design, but there's no visual gap in between. Now, if you want that, you can. It doesn't have to be functional. It doesn't have to hold water. But I would still suggest adding a little extra slab here where it connects to it. Excuse me, so you can really blend it down. Some other styles that you can do. So we've got spiral. You've got the regular horizontal. I'm going to show you vertical. So I'm going to take my clay. Remember, if it starts getting flat at all, let the table roll it a couple times. It'll help round it out. I'm bending this one a lot. So I'm really going to make sure, especially if I see any cracking in it, that you add moisture. Some of this I've touched a decent bit. Try not to let it stick to your table though. Don't push too hard. There are two different kinds of vertical that you can make. Just folding this over on itself, kind of supporting as I go so my edges aren't cracking. Using my tools. So I've got a swirly vertical. That's one style. So this guy could maybe go next to this here if I wanted to. I could also turn this into a straight vertical. By cutting off the connectors So then this could go on here like this if I wanted to. Again, hard to meld like on the thing. So I would hold this in my hand, take my wooden knife or my fingernail, meld this guy together a little bit. Then it's a little bit stronger and easier to put up. So now we've done a little spiral, 2 different kinds of vertical. The next one is twists or braids. This one you have to get relatively skinny, otherwise it's pretty bulky on your pot. So really make sure you're working down onto smaller bits, smaller coils. Working right in the crack of the table, it's really annoying. Use that whole expanse of your hand. I go really long and skinny with this one. If you don't know how to braid, I'd suggest just going for a swirl. A braid is 3 pieces. A swirl is 1 piece. So what I'm going to do is the easy swirl, done with 1 piece at one time. So I'm going to stand it up. I'm going to fold it in half. I'm not worrying about if this is going to crack down at the bottom here where it's connected. And now I can take and twist both sides. And I can twist it as tight or as loose as I want. The tighter you twist it, the maybe more likely it is that it will do some like kind of shifting or cracking. That's why it's really important to add a little bit of extra moisture. Now I've got a nice little spiral guy there. If I were going to braid, you would have to know how to braid. That would be like one requirement. These would even be a little bit skinnier and really nice and plastic. So make sure you add that moisture into them. I'm going to unite the 3 top pieces and I'm going to pinch them together a little bit. When you braid, you're just twisting which one goes over the top. So this one's going to go over. Now this one's going to go over. And this one's going to go over. And this one. And over and over. I think in Europe they call this plaiting. So now I've got a braid. This one definitely kind of nice to squeeze in your hand a little bit. Use your fingernail or the wooden knife to kind of like unite the backside or like add a little bit of slab to that. Then I can get that out of here, cat. Then I can add that one on. So we've got the swirl into the braid. This looks nice. You can also do spheres. Just like grabbing a chunk of clay. Kind of like Dill. This is Dill. Say hi to the camera, Dill. And then I just kind of roll it in my hand. Oh my goodness, cat. Get your life out of here. So I've just kind of rolled it in my hand. I definitely make a couple of these before I actually apply them on. They don't have to be uniform in size. You can go smaller, you can go bigger. So I'm going to fill this little gap here. Again, I'm going to put a small one in here. Maybe I'm going to drop my clay, whatever works. And they don't even have to even be like, I mean, I could go for like little egg shapes, little ovals. Kind of roll with it and see what happens. Then I could do like another whole coil around this whole thing. You could also do little slabs that are like texturized. So what do I have around here that's got texture? Let's see. Something I can impress with. So say I make a little slab piece. I'm going to make this just like little oval guy with my hands. And he's going to go right here next to this guy. I could take something that has like a design on it and press it into it. So if I'm just gonna push this on, just so those little stars. So now I've got little stars on there. I can put that on the outside and then blend that in. I could carve a design into it, or I could just leave it plain. Totally up to you. I think of other styles. Sounds like pretty much everything. Now, big thing, make sure you're blending the inside as you go. So you don't have to do this all at once, especially if you're starting to get more narrow. It's hard to get your hand in there. If it is going to be functional, it has to be extremely smooth on the inside with your sponge, because if you have little cracks and crevices and you drink milk out of this and then you clean it, but that milk doesn't come out of the crevice, you're going to build bacteria up in there. Even if it's not functional, I'm going to have you photograph the inside because I want to see that you're doing it properly and that you're smoothing it as you go. We're going to see this from all angles when it gets turned in, so be careful about that. Now, don't build more than 2 to 3 inches in a day. I would definitely not go above this. This clay is not stiff enough to support more weight. We want it to slightly harden up a little bit as we go. So don't try to build 6 inches in one day. It won't turn out well for you. So any clay that I have left over, I'm going to make sure I save. So I'm going to ball it up, take it off my tools, take it off my fork. I'm going to ball it up. I'm going to take a little bit of moisture from my sponge. I'm going to kind of push it into it. I'm going to squeeze that moisture into it because our hands have taken a little bit of moisture out of this poor clay. It's okay if it goes in your bag sloppy. So I'm going to put it back in my bag. If I have one of these style bags, I'm going to twist this bag on itself. I'm going to put the twist tie back on and lean it over itself, like on top of its lid. If I have the Ziploc bag, I'm going to suck as much air out of it as I can in the Ziploc and make sure it's Ziploc shut. With this, I'm going to use my extra bag, make sure there's no holes in it. If there is, just grab another bag and double bag it. And I'm going to bag this. I'm going to gently lift it up and bag it underneath. Or, a couple options. You don't want to have to like lift this up too much. So I could, let me find it again. I could lay my bag down, pot down. Try to get as much air out as possible. Air is your enemy in drying clay. And I could store it like this, or I could store it over my entire board. As long as I'm making sure that this bag isn't going to open again. I could kind of twist tie this shut as well. Any old bag will do, like Walmart, Target, like a Ziploc, whatever you can do to store this in its home. And then in your studio at home, you're going to want to make sure that you don't leave a bunch of clay on your tools. Take that bucket, wipe down the area that you've been working on, and then either take like some paper towels or a towel that you have in the house. Let's see, I've got one. Oh, if I don't, oh, yep, here we go. Don't let it air dry. You can already see this is getting streaky. Sometimes it takes a couple different times to wash it, especially if this is somewhere that you're going to eat. Like I do this at my kitchen table a lot of times. Like this is my craft room, but I'll get clean water on my sponge and wipe it down. Dry it. If you don't dry it, that like chalky, like see how much is still on there? That chalky scuzz will stay on there. So make sure you're washing and drying it. I'm going to dump the water out of my bucket, and I'm going to keep my tools in here, and then keep all my stuff stored together. Those first few days, you should really only get like your base done and maybe 1 or 2 coils. Second day, maybe a couple more inches. We're going for about 6 to 8 inches. It should take you roughly 4 days to finish. So you'll have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. If you want to work over the weekend, you can. It's definitely not required. Monday, and then we'll probably finish on Tuesday. I will do a check-in between now and then to see where you're at. So we'll photograph and turn in progress, and just so I can give you some tips and see how it's going and all that good jazz. Otherwise, good luck.